Scholars, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about influence. We're going to talk about influence online, and that's going to have a wide range of applications and context to it. We're going to talk about everything from the process of influence as a social process. We'll talk about influence as a much more deliberate process from third parties, particularly organizations. And of course, we'll talk about influencers, whatever they may be. So let's get into it. So there's some general questions I want to ask you as we get started. Why societally do most of us do the following things? Why do we wear pants or some sort of leggings? Most of us do, right? When we answer the phone, why do we answer the phone? Hello. Why that phrase? And of course, the time-honored question, why the hell do we still have Nickelback? Now, these are really sort of broad and complex questions, but the answer to all of those is because of influence. There are forces in our lives that have made us want to wear pants, normalized answering the phone with hello, and somehow propagated Nickelback's continued career, all evidence to the contrary. All of these can really be boiled down to social influence. Definitionally, this is a symbolic effort to preserve or change someone's behavior, cognitions, emotions, or identities. And so we'll talk about, when we talk about influence today, that's really what we're talking about, the symbolic efforts to change someone else. And that can manifest in a lot of different ways. And sometimes it's very deliberate, sometimes it's almost accidental. Now, an important juxtaposition here, definitionally, is to look at this definition of social influence and contrast it against the idea of persuasion, which is the intentional effort to affect someone's mental state, and in which the persuadee, the person being persuaded, has some measure of freedom. Now, contrasting those two definitions, there's a lot they have in common, but some of the differences probably jump out to you first. So social influence is either intentional or unintentional. You could be doing this very deliberately, or it could just sort of happen as a byproduct of regular interaction. Persuasion is definitionally very intentional. Persuasion really only looks at affecting your mental state, but social influence can also affect your behavior, emotions, or identity. In social influence, you may not necessarily be free to decide whether or not you want to have this effect or be changed. In persuasion, you've got some measure of freedom afforded to you. And so the processes that they go through, whether it's intentional or not, and the targets that we make, whether it's behavioral or emotional, there's some differences between these two. But broadly, the thing they have in common is they're both trying to affect people. They're forms of influence. How do we control others and guide others? And this could be very nefarious, everything from starting cults to major changes, but it can also be very simple, such as why do we all wear pants? Because that's what everybody does. Why do we answer the phone hello? Originally, when it was first developed, given its nautical influence, it was intended to be answered with ahoy, and most of us don't, because most of us don't. And I know that reasoning seems very circular, but the reason we answer the phone with hello is because that's what everyone else does, and that behavior manifests as a form of influence. So where online does this influence come from? Where do we see these influential forces? There's a couple different sources online that can affect our behaviors, our thoughts, our sense of identity, and our emotions. The first of which kind of leads back to the idea of things like pants and hello. It's social norms. It's the rules and standards that our referent group has for us. Now, this referent group may be those in your country or maybe just your region. I'm a Midwesterner, and so inevitably when I have to pass someone, I'm sort of contractually obligated to say, oh, gonna slide right past you there, because oh is a Midwestern social norm. You just use this as sort of an interjection to gain someone's attention, and usually in an apologetic way. And that doesn't track when I visit family out on the East Coast, because the East Coast doesn't say ope. This is sort of a broader social norm, but online, where we're not constrained by geographic or sort of familial influences, we still see similar social norms develop. One of which we've seen developed over the course of years is this idea that if you're typing with the caps lock on or in all caps, we read it as shouting. And in fact, you almost read it in your head as at a louder volume. And this really is where we started seeing some of the initial pushes against the cues filtered out paradigm, because we overcame those lack of cues. Without being able to read volume, we found a way to typographically account for that. And by typing louder, I don't mean banging your keys harder, but rather using a caps lock on or a larger font size, we can now read these as normative to read these as shouting. We've likewise seen a mix of caps and lowercase going back and forth as a way to indicate some sort of sarcasm or mockery. And so particularly when paired with the SpongeBob meme here, so someone says filling out FAFSA, tuition and books are expensive, to which FAFSA replies, and you can almost read it in this voice, tuition and books are expensive. That up, down, up, down, up, down of caps and lowercase font allows individuals to sort of normatively read that as some sort of mocking or condescending tone. But there's other forces of social influence online, one of which is the people that we are associated with and that we associate ourselves, and the social groups with which we're associated. At the most fundamental level, the people with whom we are associated online can affect how we are perceived or how others perceive us or we perceive us. And so, and this is backed up by research. If you look at your friends list, whether this was back in the day, MySpace top 10, or if you log on to Facebook, this person follows these people and then there are those pictures. What we actually find is if the friends that you associate with are more attractive, people tend to see you as more attractive as well. Alternately, if the friends that you associate with look a little bit closer to me and are a little homelier, then you yourself are viewed as a little less attractive. Now, your physical attractiveness hasn't changed, and your physical attractiveness shouldn't be determined by anybody other than you. You are wonderful. But the normative influence, and we see this offline, it's unfortunately called the cheerleader effect. When you're surrounded by attractive people, it tends to pull toward the mean, and people then view you as attractive as well. This happens in other ways too, based on our association. And so one of the common affordances of social media is the system collecting and counting and displaying how many people you're connected to, whether this is number of Twitter followers, Facebook friends, whatever. That can also influence your attractiveness as well. And so when we just see no other friends around you, but how many friends do you have, we see this inverted U-shape factor of how many friends do you have and what effect does that have on your physical attractiveness. And your physical attractiveness seems to peak around 300 friends. Anything below or after that, and you're somehow less physically attractive. Now again, we haven't changed anything about you. You're still you, the same photograph has been used as your profile photo, but what's changed is your association with others. And we do seem to have this understanding that if you're friends online with 1,000 people, you can't have that many number of concurrent meaningful relationships. It's a violation of Dunbar's number and some of our expectations about the numbers of meaningful relationships an individual can hold at the same time. If you're only friends with 50 people online, you're also kind of a nerd and something's wrong about this. And so we have this sort of implicit overlay of about 300 friends or 300 associations. Sounds kind of about right for what a person can be, and that way we overlay that onto their physical attractiveness, that they seem more genuine and therefore physically attractive. So if you want to be more attractive online, get rid of some of your friends if you've got more than 303, and then make sure the ones you get rid of are the homelier ones. There's the quick fix to make yourself more attractive online. The other way that the social influence can really affect us of others is when we see, and not affecting us ourselves, but rather how we think and perceive, is how we identify relative to others who are making statements online. And so we've seen studies where they'll show someone a PSA. This one is a gun violence awareness in schools PSA, obviously anti-shooting. And below a lot of online videos, whether they're in YouTube or wherever else, there are people that post comments. And so you see these two comments below you. The first one starts off with, "These drills always scare the crap out of me. My school's been under lockdown 3 times in 8 years." The second one is, "I'm approving and I'm shocked how screwed up American society has become." There is a good chance, based on the data, that you are going to be more affected by and move your mindset in line with the first one, assuming you're an American, in part because that first one, "The drills always scare the crap out of me. My school has been under lockdown 3 times in 8 years." You start to develop some sort of social connection with them. And specifically, there's a social categorization put in place. You and the first poster are both byproducts or members of American public schools. And so this person seems like you and sounds like you and talks like you and shares your experience. and therefore the things that they're saying should resonate with you more. This person's like me. It's a very side effect, that social identity model of de-individuation effects. The second poster, I'm Peruvian. Unless you're Peruvian, that person doesn't sound like you. And so the rest of the message that follows is not going to influence you as much. And so when we're online and see lots and lots of comments below YouTube videos, news stories, whatever, we find ourselves being more influenced by others that are actually closer to us, with whom we share commonalities. Other source of influence online is self-presentation. And it's not that your self-presentation is a source of influence, but the people with whom you associate are going to affect your self-presentation. And so think about your social networks on Facebook or Twitter or TikTok, where you have different parts of your life, different social groups that connect with you on there. Offline, you are probably slightly different at school than you are at work, than you are with a club, than you are at a religious meeting. Those are all faithful, true parts of you, and yet your family may not need to see the going out drinking on Friday night with the college gang that you do on Friday nights. Likewise, the college gang doesn't need to know all about you when you were a high schooler that your family knows. Offline, we're often able to really keep these sort of different self-presentations apart. Online, though, these social groups collapse. And now our coworkers, our family, our friends, our religious members, our social groups all see us there. So Bernie Hogan proposed this idea of the lowest common denominator self. In other words, it's providing sort of a minimal amount of information, but that self, that identity that is most palatable, that's most accepted by the largest number of your social groups. So that you're being very studious this semester. Your coworkers like that because they like someone who really buckles down and goes to work. Your family likes that because you're a good college student. Your friends like that because, yeah, college students, classes kind of stink, but that's what we have to do. So it works for everyone. You're not going to necessarily share self-presentations of yourself on this very accessible and across multiple social groups presentation of yourself chugging beer out of a bong, because that may upset coworkers or family, maybe not as much friends because they're the ones with you. And so even how we present ourselves and the dimensions that we present ourselves is influenced by virtue of the audiences that we think of or know of and imagine ourselves interacting with online. Now, memes can probably be brought up in a lot of different places in this whole course and in the arena. And how do we talk about them? I want to talk about them with the sense of influence, because in addition to just being fun, we have seen them being very successfully, unfortunately, in some cases, used to influence other people. Now, the term memes originated in biology, and it was how genes replicated themselves. But we since have sort of appropriated that into communication sciences to talk about a unit of culture spread by copying or imitation, not coping, copying. And so we see this often with both photos. So you have a photo in the background with a text overlay, and there's often some sort of juxtaposition either between the text and the picture or the text and the context of the picture. And so here it's a picture of one of then President Bush's advisors coming in to tell him about the 9/11 terrorist attacks while Bush was at a press event in Texas. And so this was sort of very serious, you're getting this very dire message. And then you overlay it with sort of goofy text like, sir, this old guy is going to talk about memes. And so it helps if you know the background to the image, if you sort of know who this person is or what the context is of that interaction, but it's not always necessary. So again, probably the place we've most often seen memes is a static image with text overlay, but these also happen in audio, video. We've seen audio only being memified, going mimetic. So we'll talk about these sort of one-dimensionally, but please recognize that these can include a lot more. The biggest things about memes is they're shareable and modifiable. Modifiable means we can take that same image and put different text over it to make it more salient or more relevant to a different context. And so some of the earliest memes were almost nonsensical. So one of the first ones, there was this picture of this cat that says, Icon has cheeseburger. And it was sort of this non sequitur, nonsensical thing. And yet people realized they could sort of take this meme, something that was silly in some online spaces like 4chan and Graph Jam and pull it into other situations and scenarios as sort of this image denoting desiring. And so they would change this text and I can has good study session, or I can has college football win, whatever was appropriate to their situation. And so because it's so readily modifiable, this is where we see pictures being very memeable, because we can just have things like flipgrid.com where you go in, find your meme, overlay your text, and it's done. You don't have to know any computer programming. The other thing about memes is they tend to be very shareable. So audio-visual memes can be shared through either Vine or TikTok or YouTube. Picture memes can be shown through Imager or Instagram. There's a lot of ways to disseminate these very quickly, particularly thanks to social media. And so we've seen memes become a very large part of the sort of online zeitgeist. Now, a lot of this is just entertainment. Cat with a cheeseburger, or one of my favorites was always a walrus claiming that someone had stolen his bucket. It's just dumb. It's just funny. But to bring this back to influence, we have seen memes used very effectively, and sometimes, unfortunately, to affect the behaviors and thoughts and emotions of others. One of these ways is by spreading information. Because they're usually funny, because they're tend to be graphic intensive and lower on text, they're pretty easy to read, they're pretty quick to understand, and they're very good at sharing information and perspectives. Rather than having to read through some multi-page text, it tends to be pretty easy to take in and digest. Unfortunately, the perspectives shared aren't always necessarily pro-social ones. And so we saw particularly during the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic, people sharing memes that were just flat out wrong about the virus, about the solutions to the virus, about social trends and masking policies, about immunizations and vaccines. And so this one where we have the Drake meme from Hotline Bling, the song, the first one he's sort of shying away from, chance of a virus with 99.97 recovery rate. Bear in mind that millions of people died. And then sort of pointing toward altering the DNA from an experimental vaccine with no liability from a corrupt industry. None of this is true. Vaccines don't affect DNA. It wasn't experimental. It had been tried and validated through the FDA. It's corrupt industry just has absolutely no support to it at all. And yet those on the anti-vax sort of train really took memes like this to disseminate and share that information, because something sort of fun and quick and easy like the Hotline Bling Drake meme is a lot easier to share than trying to get people to read through, for example, scientific literature documenting COVID mortality rates or something, and frankly, more bleak. Memes tend to be fun and interesting. Death reports are not. The other things that memes really do well to influence others is appeal to social groups. And so you'll often see memes that are either appealing to an in-group or a sort of rallying against the out-group. So from the in-group perspective, here we have sort of the four scenes of Leonardo DiCaprio. Starting in the upper left as a student social worker, young and idealized and optimistic. Then the Great Gatsby scene, holding a toasting wine glass, graduating social worker. Then Wolf of Wall Street, first day as a qualified social worker. I'm ready to do this. The world is my oyster. And then grizzled and beaten up Leonardo DiCaprio, the 3-year veteran social worker. I'm not a social worker. I don't exactly know what this means, but you quickly get the general gist of it, that social work is a wonderful and valuable career goal, but man, it takes a lot out of you even after the first 3 years. So it certainly appeals to a broader audience as well. But I imagine if you or a friend is a social worker, this is the type of message they would really take into themselves. By the same token, we'll see memes that denigrate outgroups. So if you're a really big Red Sox fan, sharing memes why the Yankees suck, just because it helps not only denigrate the other group, the Yankees, but also then makes your group, the Red Sox fans, feel better. The other thing they can do, and sort of leapfrogging off that, is they can use those social identities and play in those social identities to intensify that sense of you and then persuade yourself and others and change behaviors. And so we see, for example, a lot of organizations doing things like share your favorite cat pic or pet pic with a Starbucks cup. And so then all of a sudden we get all these posts coming in of Muffins the cat here wearing a Starbucks apron. And while it seems fun and harmless, what you're really doing is engaging and interacting with Starbucks or posting more information about Starbucks, or maybe even running out to get a teeny tiny little cat-sized Starbucks apron. And that can really strengthen your identification with Starbucks as a brand, increase your desire to go shop at Starbucks and buy things from Starbucks. And especially if you're a Starbucks person, you're more likely to take this challenge to heart and post a picture of your pet with Starbucks paraphernalia. So there's lots of ways, both sort of direct and subtle, that memes can start to influence others. Now, especially the Starbucks example leads us into a sort of a quick aside here, because as we talk about influence, some of it is just through other internet denizens, such as ourselves, but organizations are increasingly using these tactics for both advertising and public relations. It's a little beyond the wheelhouse of this particular topic, but it's worth talking about these briefly to talk about then the tools that they do use as a form of CMC. So advertising can be differentiated from PR because, first of all, it's paid. You buy a media spot and you say, I'm going to give you $2,000 and I want a TV spot at this time on this program. Therefore, it's guaranteed. You have bought that spot in print, an online placement, whatever, and so it's guaranteed. The advertiser has complete creative control. Whatever the mass medium is, whether it's Facebook or a local television station, can just refuse the ad. We're not going to air it if it's truly problematic, but that's really all they can do is either take it or leave it. Everything that goes into that advertisement is guided by the organization. And the goal of advertising tends to be very direct influence. I want you to buy this. I want you to think this way. I want you to vote for this candidate. In contrast, public relations is earned. So we're going to set up some talking points, and it's got to be engaging enough for others to then talk about it. And therefore, any mentions that we get, any online buzz about it, is earned. And we have to persuade the media that that's interesting, and whether the media is a formal medium like a news outlet or a television station or radio station to talk about today's event, we've got to take time to do that, and they've got to buy into it. If this is an influencer showing this as a brand they're willing to sort of put their stamp of approval on and be willing to associate with, we've got to persuade the media that this is worth taking time and effort away from other things to mention. The media then tends to control the final version. So in an advertisement, we can say, run this 30-second spot in front of a YouTube video. But in public relations, if you're getting someone to talk about the product, if I'm going to talk about this highlighter, I may just say this is a highlighter and be done with it. I may extol the hand grip or how clean the strokes are or how neon-y the brush is. But that's all my choice as someone, the media itself, or the media spokesperson. And the organization behind it doesn't get to make those sort of decisions. And lastly, it tends to be very indirect. So rather than explicitly telling you what to do, it's mostly showing people things like, this is interesting, this is worth talking about, this is worth thinking about. It may eventually end, again, because they don't control the final version, in whoever that media personality is, whether it's influencer or just John Q. Public with, oh yeah, and I really like this highlighter and you should go buy it. But really the goal is to get them just to talk about it and bring it to your awareness. Ultimately, though, the thing they both have in common, both advertising and public relations, are really looking to persuade. They want to affect your attitudes, beliefs, possibly your actions as well. So again, that's a little bit beyond the purview of CMC. And these are courses, if not entire disciplines in their own right. The reason we have to talk about them is both of those are looking to persuade, and both advertising and PR persuade through CMC. So to pull it back, how do they do that? One way is through one-way messaging, where either the brand directly tells you something or the brand tells you something through intermediary party, whether it's an influencer or electronic word of mouth. We'll get to both of those in a moment. So some of the ways we do this is just sending direct messages or advertisements. If you've ever gotten an email in your box, especially from if you signed up for a customer frequency list saying, hey, we've got a sale today. If you've got an app on your phone, I'll get direct messages from Starbucks saying, hey, it's a buy one, get one day at Starbucks. I can't give any feedback to that. There's no interaction the organization wants to have with me, whether it's through email or notifications or tweets. It's just telling me stuff that's going on. But increasingly, that one-way messaging goes beyond what would sort of just be the equivalent of an offline ad. A lot of, particularly social media, allow advertisers and PR practitioners to really specify and target. And so, for example, if you're buying advertising on TikTok, you can go in and specify everything from, I want this message to be directed at people in this geographic area. And so if you've got a multi-state rollout happening, you can tailor messages for, hey, this is for people in Michigan, just like you. Hey, this is for people in Wisconsin, just like you, to only be seen by people in Michigan and Wisconsin, respectively. Those targeted ads aren't just geographic in nature. We can say, I only want this ad to be shown to 18 to 24-year-olds who are female, who spend a lot of time interacting with these types of content. So only people that are also interacting with car content or democratic content, whatever it is, but using some of the metadata, the information you're creating about your own behaviors to really carefully target the messages that you're getting, whether it's promoted posts or advertising slid in next to your feed. And lastly, organizations, especially in gaming, are really using embedded advertising. This is a screenshot from Uncharted 3, where in multiplayer mode, Subway had a partnership where now the protagonist is going to eat a Subway sub. We see product placement happening all the time, but embedded advertising and embedded products in various mediated spaces has not only the benefit of the same as product placement, where we just see things and we sort of think about them and it's top of mind awareness, but unlike being a product placement in a movie or a television show, we can further customize these things. And so we can update it. If you have a product placed in a television show, you can't reshoot the episode 5 years later if you want to change the product. But you could swap out a Subway in Uncharted 3 for a Jimmy John's or a Quiznos or a Chipotle. Whoever wants to pay you that week. We can change billboards in racing games. The other benefit is, unlike movies and television shows, sometimes they actually make the experience more immersive and more natural. If you're in a driving game, driving down the road with no billboards, that just doesn't feel quite right. If you're driving down the road with virtual road with billboards that have advertisements for things that don't exist or only exist in game, it's better, but it still feels weird. If you're driving down the road and see a billboard for upcoming political elections, for retailer near you, it gives it a sense of realism that the game might otherwise not have. In contrast to one-way messaging is two-way messaging, where no longer is the organization using CMC tools to just sort of broadcast a mass message. Rather, they're going to use interpersonal communication or mass personal communication in a dialogic approach, trying to establish a dialogue, trying to elicit responses and feedback either from yourself specifically or from other users of the platform. Even if you don't respond, if it's going to initiate some sort of interaction or discussion, the dialogic approach has been met. And we see a lot of ways this can happen online. First of which is just to build relationships. So you go leave a cruddy review on Yelp about a restaurant, or in this case, a fencing company. If they don't respond to you, it's not a dialogue, but it provides them the opportunity to have that dialogue. And so we see here Stephanie is upset because they never got back to him. And the owner can come in and say, Stephanie, I'm really sorry. We didn't reach out to you. We're putting steps in place to make sure this doesn't happen again. If it's not too late, I'd love a call, but I understand otherwise. Even if Stephanie doesn't particularly like this fencing company anymore, others can see this business was responsive and tried to address the concerns and help build relationships, not only with Stephanie, the customer, but with other customers as well. Parasocially, I can feel like Stephanie and recognize if this company doesn't call me back right away, it's not that they're blowing me off or don't need the money, it's they were just busy and sort of mea culpa, and they'll reach out as soon as they can. Now that said, opening yourself up to dialogue in the dialogic paradigm does open the brand up for more risk and more exposure online when you lose control of the discussion around your organization. If you put up just a website of yourself, you have complete control over what's said. But once you're on Yelp, or once you start engaging with customers on social media by opening up comment section, it provides opportunities for people to share much more direct perceptions. And so we see things, not only negative reviews on things like Yelp, but also the process of review bombing, where if an organization or an organizational member has been caught doing something badly, people will come online and go to Yelp and artificially, I shouldn't say artificially, create false negative reviews. They haven't actually been there, they haven't actually eaten there, but what essentially is they're making a statement and then they're pushing down the star rating of that organization, so that when people are looking for it, thinking, do I need a sandwich shop in town, they don't go to this one because it's got a very low peer rating. So building up these relationships are really good, because if you really engage in dialogue with stakeholders, it can lead to a lot of increases in things like brand attractiveness and relationships, intention to buy from or shop from that organization. But it does, that same sort of vulnerability can also create potential threats for the organization. Other thing that can also happen from the flip side of it is astroturfing. And so, for example, if you're going to start up a business, you may want to sort of seed your Yelp ratings by a couple false reviews. So you get your friends and your neighbors and your cousins to all come in and say, oh my gosh, what a great restaurant, what a great business. And so as much as you can open yourself up as an organization to the sort of concerns of others manipulating online reviews, sometimes others need to be mindful of the organization manipulating online reviews as well. And just because you have a two-way interaction where the customers can interact with the organization doesn't mean the organization's not necessarily interacting with itself. Lastly, two-way messaging, sometimes beyond the span of control of the organization itself, can include brand communities. And these are fans or people that are involved with the community and want to talk about it. And so one place we see these often manifest is particularly for popular brands. There will often be subreddits on Reddit. So the screenshot here you see is from Starbucks. The big challenge with brand communities is it can absolutely lead to a lot of great discussions and natural exposure and information and ways for people to demonstrate and increase their brandom, their connection with that brand. It can also provide potential threats. And so what you see on the screen is, it seems to be, we don't know for sure, posts from two different likely Starbucks workers, one asking why, oh why, in part because there's 12 sugars, half an inch of whole milk, half an inch of 2%, half an inch of sweet cream, half an inch of almond milk, half an inch of cream, like these over-specified Starbucks orders that have become so much of a trope, they're a joke. But then also another employee asking why we're not asking for names at the drive-through anymore. And so these communities can provide great opportunities for organizations to have these sort of natural dialogues and discussions about their brand. But again, it's not like Starbucks is coming in here and managing this subreddit. And so there's a lot of potential threat to them as well. And so at the very least, being mindful and monitoring of what's being said on this subreddit. Because at the very least, this subreddit may be a chance for Starbucks to actually get some feedback from customers, employees, et cetera, about things like, should we limit the specification of drink orders? Should we start retaking names at the drive-through? Doing a little bit of strategic listening. Last but not least, let's talk about influencers. Actually, it's not last or least. Penultimately, let's talk about influencers. So influencers is a sort of a really muddy term for academics. We colloquially know what they are. We talk about influencers. We often think about Kim Kardashian. Ms. Kardashian's career really started with some of her celebrity reality media, which she then leveraged into a television show. And yet it's not always about these sort of big name celebrities that have then just started a large online following. Now, the definition of influencers, one of the most common ones at least, is really defined by online following. And so people that are already famous offline can leverage that much more readily than the average Joe who has to build up a following online. And so we see a lot of the people with the largest followings on Instagram and TikTok are already celebrities for one reason or the other, whether it's a Kardashian, who again, reality media, we'll see top athletes like The Rock or Ronaldo. We'll see artists and musicians like Selena Gomez and Justin Bieber. And so those with a really high follower count just by virtue of them already being famous. But certainly influencers also can gain a high number of followers online through the nature of their content. Mr. Beast started out online and doing YouTube videos and just created interesting content and reached over 1 million followers and is now considered a mega influencer by virtue of his reach. Now, sort of important in this definition is just having a lot of people following you may define you as an influencer, but in and of itself does not indicate influence. Just because Ronaldo has 4 million followers online does not inherently mean he is influencing them. So we need to delineate a little bit between the noun and the verb. Now, how many followers you have will help sort of guide some fuzzy guidelines about what category of influencer you are. And so we see in this on the image here, the mega influencers tend to be having 1 million followers or more on their platform. Macro influencers between 0.5 and 1 million, 50,000 to 500,000 being that mid-tier influencer, micro influencers, and then nano influencers, 1,000 to 10,000. And different people will give you slightly different heuristics, but these are pretty good guidelines. The important thing to note in this is that reach does not innately mean influence. Kim Kardashian telling thousands and millions of followers what facial product she's using this week may not influence everyone. You may follow someone without being persuaded by them. And so we need to think about the size of our followers versus the niche that we fill. Selena Gomez has millions of followers, and for those looking for skincare routines or lifestyle advice, the things she says, the products she promotes, may influence many of them. But still, too, we also need to talk about niche, because you may have a smaller number of followers, but the thing you're talking about is more focused, more narrow, and that narrow cast message can actually be reflected in a greater percentage of the people following them being influenced. Said another way, Selena Gomez has 1 million followers. She says, try this brand of makeup. Maybe 2% of her followers will try that brand of makeup. That's still a huge number of people trying the makeup. And so it's effective marketing for the makeup company to sponsor Selena Gomez to sort of push their brand. But again, small relative proportion of the followers. Alternately, Epic Voice Guy has a very small number of followers. But if you're into the Transformers, he's really good at telling you what the upcoming trends are, the sales are, new products coming in, new animation being done. He does voiceover work. He does a lot of the conferences. Way, way fewer followers, but those that do follow are a really tight, really focused market. And so within that very, very limited market, he may have a great deal more influence and be able to affect a larger proportion of his followers than did Selena Gomez. Ultimately, being an influencer is just a form of electronic word of mouth, a friend telling a friend telling a friend. This has happened offline for years, but online we see this happening often more at scale. If you're traveling and someone says, oh, where should I stay? You might ask a friend and they say, oh, we went down to Disney last year and we stayed at this resort. That's word of mouth. Someone told you about this. Online, there's other forms of electronic word of mouth that happens as well. And these may just be as simply as when you log on to Expedia or hotels or a booking site, you'll see on the right-hand side there, it also comes with ratings. How have people reviewed and rated this hotel? And those rankings will affect people's decisions at which hotel to stay at. There's often a trade-off between cost and then hotel rankings. We've seen similar things with what doctors should I visit, using doctor recommendations online, products to buy on Amazon, movies to watch on Netflix. And all of this is happening not necessarily from a specific influencer. Selena Gomez isn't telling me what hotel to stay at, but it is happening from other travelers like you. Because by virtue of going to this place and considering these hotels, those people you are going to perceive, the people rating it, are similar to you and can really guide and affect our decisions of what hotel to stay at, doctor to become a patient of, and products to buy online. It's all a form of influence. So all this said, there becomes a question. We've talked about astroturfing, we've talked about paid advertising. How can we tell online what's real? To answer that, we're going to bring up warranting theory. As a sort of great example of this, during the 2020 elections, this tweet came out. I'm a black gay guy, and I can personally say that Obama did nothing for me. My life only changed a little bit, and it was for the worse. Everything is so much better under Trump, though. I feel respected, which I never do when Democrats are involved. This is not a statement radically different than many of the ones we saw during the 2020 elections. What is notable is that it's posted by Dean Browning, and the profile picture that he has is of a white male. And so this juxtaposition came up with, here's a person presenting himself as a white male who then claimed, I'm a black gay guy. And Twitter users quickly pointed out that he'd probably forgotten to change to his alternate account to engage in some propaganda. But what this case exemplifies is some of the questions about how can we tell who someone is, how can we tell the connection between how someone presents themselves online and who they really are offline? So in other words, this isn't so much about vetting the truthfulness of their claims, but rather how do we account for the claim being made to a specific person? In another example, during a court hearing a couple of years ago, Marjorie Taylor Greene, representative from Georgia, was on trial. And one of the questions that was posed to her was about calls to action to essentially shoot the Speaker of the House, which is a felony and in many other ways bad. And they said, well, did you post this? And Representative Greene came back with, well, many people have access to my Twitter, and one of them may have posted it. I don't recall posting it myself. And so issues like Dean Browning and Marjorie Taylor Greene sort of give us this idea of just because someone's account posted it, how do we know who that person is offline? To help suss this out, we turn to warranting theory. Walther and Parks gave us sort of the first formulation of warranting theory, which said that different cues online will create a tether between the online and the offline self. And really, warranting theory is intended for these self-claims, to go back to it. Dean Browning claiming, I am a black gay guy. And so how do we know that the person posting this is in fact a black gay guy? There are some ways that we can talk about that are going to help, but I'm going to start with a way that can actually hinder this. So if we rewind the clock in Twitter a couple of years, blue checks were used when we wanted to authorize and acknowledge that the person behind the counter, the account was set up legitimately to represent the person it portrayed. So in other words, how do we know the account claiming to be the President of the United States is in fact the President of the United States and not some sort of parody account or goofy account or satire account? And so one of Twitter's responses, we're going to set up these validation checks, these blue checks that you go in and say, I am a person of note. Here's some contact information. You can call my phone or check my email to vet and ensure that I am me, the person I claim to be, and therefore that this organization, famous person, whatever, is in fact the one posting in this account. And it certainly may have been a spokesperson for an organization or a social media manager for a celebrity, but it vetted that account online was purportedly who it was to say who they were offline. The blue check got challenged when Elon Musk bought out Twitter in 2022. And one of the things that happened was shortly after he said, well, blue checks now can be purchased for $8. And for $8 a month, you can have a blue check next to your name. And the challenge was that it immediately undercut the meaning of this blue check. It used to be legitimacy of this account is who it purports to be. Later on, it became a sign of you have $9 a month of disposable income. And one of the more amazing cases of this warranting, what was purportedly a connection between the online and the offline, very shortly into this, the blue checks got problematic. And so this account, Eli Lilly and Co., purporting to be the Eli Lilly Corporation, pharmaceutical manufacturing, posted, we're excited to announce insulin is free now. It was in fact not. It was still ridiculously, prohibitively expensive. But many people, including news outlets, seeing this blue check and forgetting that it no longer meant the online entity is connected to the offline entity, acted as if it were so. And Eli Lilly itself had to very quickly come out and say, that wasn't us, insulin is in fact not free. And they actually saw several millions of dollars quickly cut off their stock valuation because they had to come out and reaffirm they were charging people for life-saving medication at highly inflated rates. So warranting theory gives us a way to talk about this, but we're still playing around with what some of the boundaries of it are, because some system cues like a blue check aren't what they used to be. So what then is a high warranting value cue? What gives us a suggestion that the online self is strongly tethered to and connected to a corporeal offline self? Well, there's a couple different things. One of which is something like a relational status online, where both parties have to acknowledge it. And so we've seen that relationships in which both people were on Facebook and both people changed their relationship status to in a relationship tended to be stronger relationships. At least they were more satisfied their relationship. And it's a warranting cue because both parties have to do it. I can't just say I'm in a relationship with Sarah Michelle Gellar. Easy to say, hard for her to answer my phone calls apparently. However, as soon as both parties have mutually agreed on this and signaled this, that becomes a cue high in warranting value. We've also seen organizations look to do this. So for example, Amazon reviews, you'll often read through reviews and it will denote the review has a verified purchase, which indicates it's a way to sort of prevent astroturfing. No longer, so someone comes in and puts this review, the system says, oh, you are putting this review up after you purchased this product, and you did purchase this product. So we don't know if the review is completely faithful and completely true and accurate to the purchaser's actual usage and experience. We are more guaranteed, though, that at least the person bought it, and therefore not just making stuff up. Higher warranting value cue. Remember back to lowest common denominator self? We have to present sort of the most sanitized version of us. Other times we can get warranting value from multiple cues. If we looked at how you're presented off LinkedIn, Facebook, Tinder, and Instagram, and sort of use those to make a composite ourselves of what seems to be the most faithful and consistent version of you, that becomes a high warranting value cue. And lastly, we see systems themselves can provide high warrant value cues. So for example, when you send an email, it actually puts, and you don't get to do this, the system puts on it the date and time of sending. So if you send your instructor an email that says, hey, I'm really sorry, I forgot about the exam and I saw it just closed at midnight, and you sent it at 9 a.m. the next day, you didn't just notice it closed, you noticed it when you woke up in the morning. By the same token, we see this, if you recall back to the more people that you follow, the more attractive you become, up to 303, that's a system generated number. You can add and drop friends all that you want, but that system is the system generated number is not manipulatable by you other than adding or dropping friends. That's a very faithful number to your actual account behaviors. So with that, we've gotten through identification chapter. Let's talk, don't stop thinking about it though. There's really rich areas of this to continue to ponder. So something to get you started. How do our social identities, how does the social categories to which you belong and associate affect online influence? Do the social groups you belong to intensify it or lessen the attempts of others to influence? So for example, think about if you're a very Starbucky person and you see an anti-Starbucks message, what's the interaction between your identity and the other's identity and the influence that results? Second, there's always a big potential threat to organizations, corporate, nonprofit, philanthropic, when they put themselves out on social media and give opportunities for others to interact with them. It's new venues, it's often commonly expected, but there's potential for harm, for misuse, for abuse. There are always going to be more consumers than there are organizational social media managers. What's gained and what's lost by doing that? What's the trade-off? If you were advising your organization, when should we adopt a dialogic approach? What's the calculus you go through to reach that decision? What are the trade-offs you make by not having a dialogic approach? And what do you gain in return? Lastly, we talked a little bit about some of the high warranting value cues. Can you think of other ones? Or alternately, can you think of low warranting value cues that would help determine the tether between an online identity and an offline self? With that, scholars, we're all set talking about influence to influencers. Thank you so much for sticking with me, and we'll see you next time.